Welcome to the third session in our nutrition education series for people living with diabetes. Today's topic is making sense of popular diets. Making sense of the continuous stream of information regarding popular eating patterns and how they apply to diabetes can be confusing. Registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator Nicole Clowe will provide evidence-based information and recommendations around healthy eating, as well as dive into intermittent fasting, the keto diet, and a plant-based diet. Over to you, Nicole.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Clowe. I'm a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. And today we're going to talk about making sense of popular diets. So these are some of the topics and diets that we're going to review today, including the Mediterranean diet, intermittent fasting, ketogenic diet, and the plant-based diet. So firstly, to start off, a little introduction. So we know that food and nutrition is an important element of diabetes management. It's often one of the first things that's discussed in your appointments with your diabetes educator, potentially with your doctor. And we know it's important to know how the foods that we eat impact our blood sugar. However, it can be really overwhelming because there's a lot of misinformation out there about the benefits of specific diets, specific foods, what you can eat, what you can't eat. And this can become really overwhelming to weed through as a person living with diabetes. So we do know that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to eating and diabetes management. And there are huge things to consider when deciding what eating pattern is going to work best for you. It has to align with your values, obviously your food preferences, and what your goals are for your diabetes management. So, you may have small changes to make that can have an impact on your diabetes, and there may be big changes that you're hoping to work through by slowly making some behavior change. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is the Mediterranean diet. So this is a primarily plant-based diet. It's one that's been heavily researched and around for a long time. We know the cornerstone of this diet is an abundance of plant foods and trying to really avoid processed foods as much as possible. We use healthy fats such as olive oil as the principal source of fat, and protein is focused on lean protein options and having red meat a lot less often. So red meat would be things like beef, pork, or processed meats made from them like bacon, bologna, ham, those kind of things. So choosing those a lot less often and focusing on plant-based protein and lean proteins like fish and seafood. Dairy is consumed in small amounts in this diet as well, but still focusing on water as the primary source of fluid. And along with limiting processed foods, we're limiting sweets like added sugar and sodium. You can see here in the picture that wine is acceptable in this diet in moderation. So this might be something to consider when you're thinking about a lifestyle change. If wine is something that you wanted to include in your lifestyle moving forward, it certainly doesn't make sense to choose a diet that restricts that, because then you may end up, not being able to sustain that diet because it doesn't align with your values. This diet encourages those plant-based proteins by asking us to eat legumes, beans, lentils at least 3 times a week. So this can be something new for people in terms of their cooking preferences. So you want to make sure you get proper education and know how to work these foods into your diet. Now let's look a little bit at the benefits and then potential things to consider when we're thinking about this diet and living with diabetes. So the research does show there's improved blood sugar management when following the Mediterranean diet. We see a lot of protein, we see a lot of healthy fat and a lot of vegetables, things that we know correlate with improving your blood sugar management. For those reasons as well, with the reduced red meat intake, the higher healthy fat intake, and lots of fiber, we see reduced risk of heart disease, reducing your cholesterol and blood pressure. Reducing inflammation. So when you look at a plate of food or a daily intake from this type of diet, you will notice lots of different colors. So the more colors of fruits and vegetables we see, the more antioxidants that we're seeing, and therefore, we can see a reduction in inflammation. Also, reduction in certain complications of diabetes. So retinopathy, which is one of the first complications that can sometimes present itself in people living with diabetes, there has been shown a reduction in retinopathy outcomes when following this diet. And then, of course, we may see potential weight loss depending on what eating pattern you're moving from to the Mediterranean diet. You might see those benefits. Some potential things to watch out for, this diet, which makes it unique from a lot of other diets these days, is that it does have a heavy emphasis on grain products. We know grains are a source of carbohydrate and sometimes can be a little scary, when we're looking to include these foods on a daily basis. So as the previous slide showed, we are looking for whole grains. These grains are high in fiber and low in refined sugar. However, portions still matter, when we're looking at the carbohydrate amount in your meals. So it's really the quality of the grain that's important, and keeping in mind the portions, because any amount of carbohydrates will impact your blood sugar. It's just how much you're having and what you're including alongside of that. Also, healthy fats are not unlimited. Fats in olive oil and nuts and seeds are often quite concentrated. These are nutrient-dense foods, meaning that you don't need to eat a lot of them to get a high caloric intake. So any additional caloric intake, is something that we want to be aware of when managing diabetes. So just being mindful of the portions of your grains, the portions of your healthy fats, and then kind of balancing that with those other foods, the fruits and vegetables, the whole grains, and the proteins and plant-based proteins. So moving on to intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting is something that's really being talked about a lot these days. And, potentially some patients say, hey, I've been doing this all along. I haven't been eating breakfast for 5 years or 10 years. So really that's what intermittent fasting is. It's just not eating or drinking anything that contains calories for a specific period of time. There are many different patterns of intermittent fasting that you can do. You can go 16 hours without eating and then eat for an 8-hour window. You can do it on periodic days of the week. So maybe you do intermittent fasting for 2 days and then you take 5 days off, or vice versa. So it really doesn't have anything to do with the foods that you're eating. It's just a restricted period where eating is allowed. So for some, this may work for them because they choose not to eat breakfast prior in their life. It worked with their lifestyle. And for others, this might be a helpful transition if you're looking to limit, some challenging times of day where you may be eating foods that you would rather not eat. So remember, there are many different arrangements of this type of diet. If it's something that you want to look into, check with your healthcare provider about what would be the best way to approach it for yourself. And we want to keep in mind as well, in this smaller window of eating, what you're eating still matters when it comes to health and diabetes. It doesn't mean you can have, unlimited portion sizes or, other qualities of food that might not be recommended for normal healthy eating with diabetes. So overall intake still matters, but the real premise of this diet is a restricted window of time that you're able to eat in. So let's look at the benefits and drawbacks or potential drawbacks of intermittent fasting when it comes to diabetes. So the research does show some weight loss and maintenance with this form of eating pattern. We're always have a difficult time contributing, where exactly did this weight loss or weight maintenance come from? Was it the intermittent fasting itself? Was it that doing this changed the quality of foods that were eaten during the eating window? It's difficult to assess for sure. But again, I think the biggest take-home message is making sure that it aligns with your values and your lifestyle and something that you can make. So we see improved insulin sensitivity. So this is something really important in type 2 diabetes, where we're often battling insulin resistance, which is the body's inability to use insulin as efficiently as we'd like it to. And therefore that improves blood glucose levels. So when you're more sensitive to insulin, and that allows your body to use insulin better and therefore improve your blood glucose. We also see improvement in blood cholesterol and triglyceride levels. So this could be linked to the quality of foods eaten during that eating window, could be contributed to weight loss or improvements in blood sugar. All of these things are kind of interrelated. So what are some things to watch out for? So with diabetes, if you're on high risk medications, meaning medications that could increase your risk for hypoglycemia, you want to make sure that you're monitoring your blood sugar really closely, either by capillary, so by pricking your finger, or if you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor. If you're on medications suited to your current lifestyle, and all of a sudden you start fasting for 16 hours a day, you could run into hypoglycemia, which therefore you would have to treat and break that fast. So if you're planning on embarking on intermittent fasting, it's good to check with your healthcare provider first to see if you're on any of these high-risk medications and they need to be adjusted before you start intermittent fasting. So it's more difficult to get all the key nutrients that you need when your eating window is shorter. Some of us struggle to get all our nutrients in a normal day, a 12-hour day, a 14-hour day, what have you. So imagine trying to get all those same nutrients, vitamins, minerals, protein, fiber in a smaller window. So it takes real purposeful planning of your meals, and maybe checking with a registered dietitian to ensure you can do that. You can get in all your nutrients in maybe 2 meals as opposed to 3. Be aware of triggers for overeating or emotional eating. You're going a long period of time without eating. This could increase your physical hunger, and then sometimes that makes it more difficult to stop at a reasonable portion. So again, this is a good thing to assess if it fits with your lifestyle. If you don't struggle with that and you're able to still maintain a balanced plate like we've seen on the introduction slide, then this may work for you, but we do need to consider that portions still matter. And then managing side effects. So this can be confusing. You may notice if you miss your lunch, you get stuck in a meeting, it's 1 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock, you may start feeling a little dizzy, a little lightheaded. These are similar symptoms to hypoglycemia. So we need to delineate, is this because I haven't eaten in 16 hours, or am I experiencing a low blood sugar? So just something to watch out for, when you have diabetes and you're embarking on this eating pattern. So the next diet that we're going to talk about is the ketogenic diet. So it's likely you've heard of this diet. It's very mainstream. There's lots of books on it, lots of information and misinformation. But down to the core, this diet is simply very low in carbohydrates, low enough that your body needs to utilize another energy source. And doing that can produce ketones in your body. So this is something to be mindful of. So this diet not only is low in carbohydrates, but therefore it is a lot higher in fat and protein. So the ranges for fat and protein can vary based on, your potential other comorbidities, based on your nutrition goals and your eating preferences. So regardless, we've got very low carbohydrate and then a higher percentage of fat and protein. So typically about 55% fat, 35% protein, and 10% carbohydrate. So when we compare this to like Canada's Food Guide or a typical balanced eating plan, carbohydrates are typically 45 to 55%, protein maybe 20 to 25, and fat around 30%. So you can see the big difference here in the balance of nutrients and therefore in what your plate looks like. So to get this low of carbohydrates, we have to eliminate virtually all grains and most fruits and some higher carbohydrate or starchy vegetables. So you can see this plate here. It has lots of protein. We have nuts, we have some meat, it looks like pork, we have a boiled egg, maybe some avocado, some cucumbers, some spinach, 4 grapes and a couple of blueberries. So, we're getting a very low amount of carbohydrates. This meal's probably less than 10%, higher amount of protein and fat, which hopefully will keep you full and satisfied, but your body can't utilize glucose for energy. So it has to break down fat to use for energy, and that produces ketones. So ketones may be a familiar word to you if you have diabetes, especially type 1 diabetes. So we want to make sure that it's understood that diabetic ketoacidosis is different from nutritional ketosis, or the ketones that you would produce when using fat for energy and thus on the keto diet. So diabetic ketoacidosis is an emergent situation. It's uncontrolled. You're having symptoms, you're not feeling well. Your blood sugar is potentially high. You may need to visit the hospital. So for this reason, you need to monitor ketones and your intake very carefully. And it isn't recommended, if you have other comorbidities such as kidney disease, very mindful when you have type 1 diabetes, and as well when you're pregnant. It should be really checked with your healthcare provider. So some drawbacks and some potential for the ketogenic diet and diabetes. So weight loss and weight maintenance as well is seen in these research studies for people who follow the ketogenic diet. We often see reduced use of medications. So is this because there's a much lower intake of carbohydrates? We don't need as much insulin or medications that increase insulin production to lower blood glucose. We see lower blood glucose levels with this higher protein, higher fat, and lower carbohydrate intake. And some research actually does show improved blood cholesterol and blood pressure. So I think one important thing to consider is that we want to ensure a well-formulated ketogenic diet, where our meals look similar to that plate on the previous slide, as opposed to, potentially being a lot of higher fat meats, processed meats. These would still, allow you to be in the ketogenic diet and produce ketones, but may not be the best for your overall health. So some potential things to watch out for are ensuring you're monitoring your blood sugars closely. Again, a very low carbohydrate intake. If your medications are adjusted based on, a previous higher carbohydrate intake, that will need to be adjusted. Impact on insulin and other medications, as I mentioned. So lower insulin is needed to maintain ketosis, because if your insulin is higher, you have to consume more carbohydrates to maintain your blood sugar. Eliminating food groups, a whole food group, really, carbohydrates, is being potentially, mostly eliminated. So this could lead to vitamin and mineral deficiencies, and it's really hard to get to the fiber amount that you need when choosing this pattern of eating. Because even with non-starchy vegetables, if we eat them in high volumes, they're going to contribute some carbohydrates. So it's difficult to get the fiber amount that you need when following a ketogenic diet. So there's potential for increased saturated fat intake. Like I mentioned, if your diet isn't well formulated, which is difficult to do, then you may face, this higher risk for cardiovascular events. Higher intake of saturated fat is linked with increasing your cholesterol. There is an increased potential for increasing insulin resistance in some patients. That's seen in the research. You remember in the previous diets, we saw an improvement in insulin sensitivity. So in this case, some potential for increase in insulin resistance, and because of the low carbohydrate intake, an increased risk of hypoglycemia. So all things that are useful to consider, right, when balanced with the benefits of this diet. So now along to plant-based eating patterns. So plant-based eating, kind of self-explanatory, but lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and we're getting our necessary protein from beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, soy products, lots of inclusion of these healthy plant-based proteins. Healthy fats, similar to the Mediterranean diet, like olive oil, from nuts and seeds, from avocado, and there's a very limited amount of animal-based products. So this would be similar to a vegetarian diet, not necessarily a vegan diet, which wouldn't include any animal-based products. So lots of colorful fruits and vegetables in this diet plan, lots of healthy fats and plant-based proteins. So for the plant-based diet, we see a lot of fiber. So what the ketogenic diet was lacking, the plant-based diet is giving us a lot of. So all kinds of different colors, lots of antioxidants, lots of protective nutrients, and lots of fiber. So we know in a normal healthy diet for diabetes, we see better blood sugar control with higher fiber intake, more feelings of fullness, which can lead to maintaining a healthy body weight. And with the, mostly elimination of animal products, a big reduction in your intake of saturated fat, which is really positive for your heart health. And we know diabetes independently increases your risk for heart disease. So that's why we keep going back to, these benefits or potential watchouts when it comes to cholesterol and saturated fat intake. So some gut health benefits. So related to all these antioxidants, related to all this fiber, you can see improvements in digestion, no trouble meeting your fiber requirements in this eating pattern. So some potential things to watch out for. So some highly processed, like non-meat alternatives can be higher in calories and fat. So, to be vegetarian, to be free of animal protein doesn't always mean it's going to be perfectly healthy. So receiving education on how to appropriately read labels and ingredients list is really good knowledge to have if you're going to be purchasing some of these meat substitutes. And it really requires a well-formulated diet to ensure you can meet your nutrient and your micronutrient needs. When cutting out meats, we have to consider, your B vitamins, your iron. So something that should be assessed by a registered dietitian to make sure that if you choose this eating pattern, for a long time, the rest of your life, that you're not going to run into deficiencies in nutrients. So the bottom line, we just reviewed all of those different patterns of eating. Some have some overlapping principles, and some have a lot of big differences. But the biggest thing you want to first consider is which one is going to work for you, your values and preferences, and your health or treatment goals. So when we find a diet that aligns with our values, it's much easier to maintain. You don't feel restricted. You don't feel like you're eating a way that just for you. You're not eating separate meals from your family. You're not feeling left out in those ways. So consult with a registered dietitian or your diabetes healthcare team before starting any new eating pattern, because like we mentioned, they can impact blood sugar control and your medications. I hope you gained some useful insight today on some popular diets.